Hi, and welcome back to another video in the LMN Virtual Workshop. This video deals with exporting design build or standard type estimates from LMN into QuickBooks. We'll show you how to set up some basic settings, and then we'll also show you a few examples of different ways to export your estimates to QuickBooks so that you get the results that you want in your final QuickBooks estimate. I'm going to start here by showing some basic QuickBooks settings, and to do that, you're going to go to QuickBooks and then set up QuickBooks. Now we're going to assume you've already gone through the installation and setup of the QuickBooks desktop application. That's the green screen that you see with the 1, 2, 3, 4 buttons at the side in order to set up your LMN account, your QuickBooks company file, and your cost code settings. This video assumes that you've already completed all that. If you haven't, go back and watch the video before this. Now here's some simple settings you might want to set before you do your first export. The first thing you're going to need to do before you export an estimate into QuickBooks is to add it to the QuickBooks export queue. That is, the estimates that are waiting to be exported to QuickBooks. When you go to the queue, it's going to show you a list of your estimates by status. Now, if you want to show all your estimates by default, just leave this by all statuses. But if you just wanted to show one status, you could set this to perhaps contract pending. And that list would only show you those estimates that are flagged as contract pending. This is just the default view. You'll always be able to search across all your estimates when you want to add stuff to the queue. And maybe you'll see more about that later. The next is the default export format. And this is going to tell the LMN export tool what style to export your estimates in. We ship LMN with 3 basic styles: simple, which shows the least amount of detail in your QuickBooks estimate; summary, which shows a moderate amount of detail; and detailed, which shows every single detail from your estimate, and it pushes that all over into QuickBooks. When we do an export, I'll show you an example of all 3, and you'll see what I mean. Finally, there's a setting for estimate status update. So after a successful export, it can automatically update your estimate status. So you could, as an example, create an estimate status called exported to QuickBooks, and upon successful export, it will automatically set the estimate status to exported to QuickBooks. You can set your estimate statuses by going to Estimate Setup and Estimate Statuses. Here's your list of current estimate statuses. If you want to add one, you can do so. Now let's jump into actually exporting estimates to QuickBooks. I've already set up a few estimates in my LMN that I'm going to use as an example. We'll open one now. I'm going to go to Estimate, Standard Estimates, and here is Dave and Nancy Anderson's estimate. This is what the estimate looks like in LMN. I've got a few different work areas: a front patio, a back patio, a front garden, some lighting, and a backyard garden. Here are the cost codes. Now, if you remember from the estimate setup video, cost codes determine which service item these each get exported to. So you can see when I'm exporting to QuickBooks, it's going to export the front patio's revenue to the hardscape service item. Same with the back patio. The front garden, on the other hand, is going to get exported to the softscape service item, the lighting to the lighting service item, and the backyard garden, again, to the softscape service item. So once again, your cost codes are going to determine which service item this revenue gets exported to in QuickBooks. You can change your cost codes by either double-clicking and dropping down any cost code, but that's a slow way of doing that. You can use the Fast button, the Cost Codes button, and it'll open up just your work area name and the individual cost codes. You can set all these at once and click OK. You'll find it a lot faster. Once you've set your cost codes, and of course, once you're sure that your estimate is ready for export, that your customers approved it and it's ready to go into QuickBooks, now you want to add it to the export queue. This way, any estimator in your company can say, okay, this is ready to be exported, but they may not have the permission to actually export it into QuickBooks. So they can add it to the queue. Then when your QuickBooks administrator comes along, they simply grab the estimates that are sitting in the queue, run the export into QuickBooks, and double check that everything came over okay. There's 2 ways to add an estimate to the QuickBooks queue. Right here on the estimate worksheet screen, There's a button now in the top right. It shows you the QuickBooks status. This estimate, for example, says not exported, which means I haven't yet exported it. To add it to the queue, I'm going to click it to Export to QuickBooks. By clicking this button, it's going to add it to the QuickBooks export queue. And you can see my status now says queued for export. It hasn't been exported yet, but it's sitting in the waiting list. There's another way to add items or estimates to the QuickBooks queue, and that's to go to QuickBooks and then the QuickBooks export option. Here it can show me all my estimates that are sitting in my LMN database. And I can search for one by name or by type, by status, by date, and whether it's been previously exported or not. Here's the estimate I just exported or added to the export queue. Dave and Nancy Anderson. It's their detail layout, and you can see here it's shown as queued. I also want to export this same estimate in 3 different versions so I can show you the difference between each one. There's a simple, and I'll add that to the export queue. There's a summary, and I'll add that to the export queue. And I've done one with an error in it as well. So I'll show you that one to see how errors are handled. All 4 of these estimates are now queued or ready to be exported. You can see all the estimates that are sitting in your queue by clicking here, Export Queue. You can see I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 that I just added, and I even have another one that I previously added to this queue, and maybe by accident. I can remove this by simply clicking the Remove button. It now disappears for the queue. Now I've got 4 estimates sitting in my queue. Over here it's asking me for the export type. That is, how do you want this estimate to show up when we export it to QuickBooks? I'll go through each type with you once we've exported to QuickBooks so that you can actually see which one each looks like. I'm going to show you an example of a simple. I'll show you an example of a summary and of a detailed. So I'll set these 3. These are identical estimates, but I'll just show you what one estimate would look like, identically, 3 different ways. When I'm ready to run the actual export into QuickBooks, you can click this Run QuickBooks Sync button, or you can run it from your desktop or wherever you've installed the LMN QuickBooks Sync application. So we're ready to go. I'll click Run QuickBooks Sync, and you'll see this green screen appear. This is the desktop installed LMN QuickBooks integration tool. Now obviously only computers that have installed this tool can run the sync, and I recommend you limit this to only a few specific people in your company. Maybe the owner has permission, maybe your bookkeeper has permission, but I wouldn't put this wide open to anyone that can do estimates. You want to control what goes in your QuickBooks, and you want to be careful with it, so make sure only the people with the right permissions have access. Now it is only going to create an estimate in QuickBooks, not an invoice. So you're not going to have to worry about accidentally affecting journal entries or actual accounting data. It will simply appear as an estimate, not an actual invoice. To export an estimate now, I'm going to click this big purple button, which says Import Estimates from LMN into QuickBooks. Now the first message you should see is that QuickBooks is ready to start. But you need to open QuickBooks to your company file and log into QuickBooks using an administrator account. Now you might not necessarily need to open it, but it's much faster and much simpler if you have it open. So here you can see I've got my QuickBooks file open and ready for import. If you have any windows open, such as a Edit Preferences window or a Memorize Transaction window, you will get an error when trying to export into QuickBooks. QuickBooks cannot import any data while a menu option window like this is open. So make sure you've closed down any of these windows waiting for information before you attempt an export. So here we are ready to synchronize with QuickBooks. I'm going to click Next, and it's going to retrieve the estimates from the import or the export queue. So notice the only estimates that'll show up to be exported into QuickBooks are those that I added to the queue in the previous steps of the video. It's going to then retrieve some QuickBooks data based on the customers I've imported, etc. So it'll take a second to do that while it goes at your QuickBooks database. Now here's the 4 estimates I'd added to my QuickBooks queue. And you can see the type that I specified for each is also here. Detailed, Summary, Simple, and Summary. Now, normally these would all be set to the same status. Once you pick the one you like, you'd typically keep them all the same. But I'm going to show you an example of each one so you can see what they look like. Over on the left-hand side here, you can see an include checkbox. If you wanted to include only 3 or maybe only one of these estimates, you could obviously click or unclick the ones that you wanted to include or not include. There's also a tab up here to show you service estimates and the service estimates that are waiting to be exported. This example video is only for standard or design build estimates, so it's going to be blank for right now. Now there's one more thing I want to show you. Scroll your scroll bar to the right and you'll see that there's a way to match it to existing customers, and it's going to tell you the status right over here. Now when it did its first loading, it was going at my QuickBooks database to see if I had any customers who matched this customer name already. And in this case, it didn't find any. So you can see the import status says new customer, new job for each one of these. It's going to look for an exact match of customer name. If it's not exact, it's not going to match it. But if it does find an exact match, it will match one. Now let's say you had a customer called Anderson Dave, and it really is Dave and Nancy Anderson. It just is spelled differently in QuickBooks or entered shorter in QuickBooks. You can match it manually by clicking the Match Customer button. That'll show you a list of all your QuickBooks customers or all the customers you've got in your QuickBooks, and you could do a find for Anderson, and it would bring it up, and if they existed, you'd be able to click on them there. I'm going to export these all as a new customer, new job. When you've got this ready, you can click Sync. It's going to process the estimates and show you the status as it goes. Estimate 1 and Estimate 2, Estimate 3, Estimate 4. If you've got QuickBooks open, again, this goes much faster. When it's finished, it's going to update, and then it's going to tell you the message, synchronization completed. And it will either say with errors or without errors. Now I exported one estimate with a deliberate error so you can see what the log file looks like. To find out what the problem was, click the button here to view the log file. Here's my log, which says estimate 43361 was complete, 43362 was complete, 43363 was complete, but 43364 had an error. Now the error description says here, exiting the import of the estimate due to a missing cost code for the item backyard garden. The cost code assigned in LMN has not been matched to a QuickBooks service item. Obviously, I'd used a cost code that I'd created manually in LMN, but didn't match it to one in QuickBooks. And to fix that, I'd have to rerun that setup tool where I match cost codes to LMN service items. Once I did that, this would work fine. The other 3 did go over successfully, so let's take a moment to look at what they look like. Here's the 3 estimates that show up under my Anderson record. Let's start with a simple to show you what that looks like first. The simple version creates a line item in the estimate for each different cost code or service item used, but it does group any work areas that have the same service item together. Let's take a look back at this estimate for a minute. Here's the Anderson residence simple estimate. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 work areas. Front yard patio, backyard patio, front garden, lighting, backyard garden. But I only have 2 cost codes, hardscapes and softscapes. What it's done when you use the simple method is export one line item for hardscapes, and then it groups the 3 different work areas that were assigned to the hardscape cost code together. So you can see hardscapes, front patio, back patio, and lighting, and a total. That total represents the sum total of all 3 of those work areas. It also creates one for softscapes, front yard garden and backyard garden, and a combined total for both of those. So if I only use 2 cost codes on this estimate, it wouldn't matter whether I had 2 work areas or 20 work areas. It would summarize the totals in QuickBooks by these cost codes. This is the simplest way to export items into QuickBooks. It does give you the least amount of detail in QuickBooks, but it does summarize the revenue by each cost code accurately and makes the invoices nice, clean, and simple. For some, that's not enough detail, and they want the detail to look a little bit more like the proposal they'd given the customer. Summary is probably your most popular option here. If I click a summary estimate, this looks very familiar to the way I structured the actual estimate in LMN. I've got a price for the front patio, the back patio, the front garden, the lighting, and the backyard garden. As you can see, it mimics exactly how I've entered my LMN estimate. I have one line item in QuickBooks for each unique work area in LMN, and a total for all of it. Note that your detailed customer descriptions cannot come over into QuickBooks. Because LMN's detailed customer descriptions, found here under the client notes, contain things like bolds and underlines, we cannot, or unfortunately QuickBooks cannot, handle that data as well as LMN can. The last way, the final way to export something is a detailed export. And let me show you what a detailed export looks like. A detailed export is going to break down each and every line item from your LMN estimate into QuickBooks. So you can see here I have a crew, a trailer, crusher run, brick sand, fabric, line by line, just like was in your LMN estimate. This will create an estimate in QuickBooks showing you the same, with a sum total price for each area. When you go to print your estimate, it's obviously going to also show each and every detail. This wouldn't be used that often when you're pricing a job from your customer, unless you like to show your customer every single detail. Most contractors don't estimate this way, as it shows the customer a little too much information. But if you do, you've got it here if you need it. Now that you've created an estimate, you can do whatever you need in QuickBooks. Create invoices off this, create purchase orders from this, create sales orders from this. Everything else can be done in QuickBooks. If I click Create Invoice, I can now do percentage billing, or I can invoice for the entire estimate, or I can break down and just invoice for specific quantities or specific percentages for each work area or line item that I've created. QuickBooks will allow you to do all this as well. That's it for exporting estimates to QuickBooks. It really is that easy. Remember the steps. Number one, make sure each one of your work areas is assigned an appropriate cost code. Then just add the estimate to the QuickBooks queue, either with the button here or using the QuickBooks queue option here under QuickBooks Export. Then you run the QuickBooks desktop application and click Export Estimates, review your settings, and click Go when you're ready. Your estimates will be pushed from LMN into QuickBooks, saving you hours of work and saving you from potential data entry errors from manually entering in the wrong numbers. For information on how to export a service estimate into QuickBooks, that'll be shown in our next video, exporting service estimates into QuickBooks.